Welcome everybody to Eat, Sleep, Suplex, Retreat. I am your host today, Scott McLeod, and today we are looking back at the renegade promotion that was ECW. And for this show, I have put together the most extreme panel that were available at this particular time. Like making it your dinner with whatever you've got left in the fridge. But before we get into the panel, remember to follow Eat, Sleep, Suplex, Retreat on social media. That'd be Twitter, Facebook or Instagram if you prefer. It's all at Suplex Retweet. And make sure to keep up with the main feed here with our usual show every week. Like last week, we had our show about Bret Hart, and next week we'll have our SummerSlam review. It is on all good Android podcast sites, Anchor, Spotify and iTunes. And also our Suplex Retweet extra feed with classic shows like Saturday Draft Live, East Meets West, and some other ones. Our first panelist today is pretty much the Paul Heyman of the SSR, in that he's the man behind it. And I'm not saying he's also a creative genius or a mastermind or anything like that. I'm just saying he oversees a talented group of workers and doesn't pay any of them either. Stephen Wilson.
You summed it up pretty well. Yeah, I'm like the Turkey Twizzlers of this group. I was big in the 90s and then I've just made a comeback.
And Angela Bastard.
Jamie Oliver.
And we've got a host of one of the best shows on ESSR Extra that isn't Saturday Draft Live or East Meets West. He is currently engaged in a best of 5 series with a pair of wankers. That is... Sorry, I'm just being handed a note here. What do you mean Ross is on holiday? Was Jack not available? Oh, fuck it. Ryan Gallagher's here.
Mate, it kind of sounds like you're getting wide, and I don't think it's right to get wide on a show about extreme, mate. Because I will go extreme on you. I will snap a kendo stick across your back, anywhere of your cheek. Actually, do you know what I'll do? Rather than that, see this bit of chocolate that I've got here. Don't get me wrong, it's nice chocolate, but it is the hardest bit of chocolate I've ever had in my life. This would smash your head in two. So if you get wide, I'm going to lob this for you to Scotson, alright?
Alright, no need to. I'm not Charles Robinson, no need to. You need to play the hard man.
He's getting an honour.
So yeah, this week is all about ECW. And we'll go back to the very beginnings when ECW didn't stand for Extreme Championship Wrestling. It stood for Eastern Championship Wrestling. And Stephen, we'll talk about first the moment where I think everybody sees as a launching pad from his Eastern to Extreme, where Shane Douglas, having won a 8-man tournament in the famous ECW arena, beating the likes of Dean Malenko, 911, Doink the Clown, and ultimately Too Cold Scorpio. He was declared the new NWA champion and then threw the belt down, declaring himself the new ECW champion.
I know, it's crazy. It's crazy actually to think that there was a potential chance that this moment might never have happened the way it did, because there was a lot of talk apparently backstage that they weren't going to put the belt on Douglas. They weren't going to give him this moment because apparently he was a tendency to no-show stuff. He was a bad risk. For a man who's named the franchise, you'd think he'd be a team player. But it's crazy to think it's just... some of the biggest moments in wrestling have involved the disgracing of a belt. We've got... there was Medusa put one in the bin. There's one that happened in Ireland that we'll never speak of again for obvious reasons. And obviously this one was probably the first one of the lot of them. And it's because it had such a shift, because the NWA is obviously, as people know about, it's the old school wrestling. It's pretty much the purest form of it. The big guys win titles, they don't care about the small guys type idea. So to then have this shift to what ECW would become after this moment was shook the landscape of wrestling at that time.
Yeah, and it's funny because you did a show about the NWA for a while, and we all know about the revival the last couple of years since Billy Corgan took it over. But Ryan, back here, the NWA was kind of seen as a dead brand at this point, and Paul Heyman in the Rise and Fall of ECW documentary basically summed up as ECW wanted to move away from tradition. He compared it to music, they wanted to be like the Nirvana of wrestling at that time.
Well, I think he made a good point actually in that documentary you're talking about, the rise and fall of ECW on the WWE network. He made a good point. He said they've still got this belt from a company that had already died, and I think this was the perfect way for them to move into what they wanted to do. You know, we know now looking back what ECW became at the kind of height of it, and that's exactly what they wanted to do. They wanted to have that extreme kind of form of wrestling, something completely different, and then you basically go, okay, well, what's the best purest wrestling you've got? Let's take that and we'll shit all over it. Is basically what they've done with this belt. And if you're wanting to asset yourself as this extreme wrestling company, that's the way to do it. And like Stephen said, you know, it's a thing that might never have happened, but I think the fact that it did happen, you know, and it gave Shane Douglas the opportunity to have that moment, because I think everybody else is looking at this, and obviously this was before our time as well, so we only look back at this, you know, kind of in hindsight. But for people who were there at the time, you know, at this show, they must have been sitting going, what the hell is going on here? Like, it was so far from what you expected from the new NWA champion that it almost, you know, that was a catapult for them to put them into stardom. Yeah,
and it's clear that the wrestling fans at the time, especially the hardcore fans that you could see in that ECW arena, wanted an alternative at the time, and they were in the right place at the right time, because the WWF was in the midst of the new generation era, which is filled with all these characters and that. And WCW just signed like Hulk Hogan and basically repeating everything that WWE used to do back in the 80s. So basically, this was the most kind of current wrestling, whereas the two big companies seem to be stuck in the past. These guys were like kind of looking towards the future.
Mm-hmm. It's a wee bit like what I'm going to say it's a wee bit like what we've got with ICW here in the past few years. Like, obviously it's not in the same scale because ECW pretty much took over, but it's the same kind of idea. It gave us something a bit different from a time, and that's why you found, you know, the likes of ICW having that progression so quickly over the last couple of years. It almost went from, it was kind of simmering, ICW, and then all of a sudden it just took off. You know, it went SEC, it went Hydro a couple of years, you know, it reached this mega point. And I think that's, you know, they are based off of ECW. That's where that came from. That whole kind of idea is where, you know, ICW stemmed from. So they set the benchmark for companies like that, you know, and although, which we'll go on to, it ultimately didn't work out for ECW, as we all know, but the foundations of it were still laid there for a company to come and pick that up all across the world.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned like ICW. The thing that any good wrestling company needs to help it take off is a loyal fan base behind it, and ECW certainly had that. Like, they even talk about it in this documentary, but you had the same fans pretty much every week and every month in the front row wearing the same clothes, so they would be recognised. And these were ECW fans. Even seem to be some of the most dedicated fans. Even in the years following ECW's death, they were still like loyal to that brand.
They were wise in the location that they picked. Obviously, I mean, when you're starting a wrestling company, you do anything with the rest, you need to have a ground for it. You know, WWE in the 80s, they had obviously the actual New York main city, but ECW had the ECW arena and around about the Philadelphia area type idea. They had a hardcore fan. They knew exactly who they were catering for. These are, we talk about it even currently now, there's hardcore wrestling locations that with WWE go to them, even probably if AEW go to them. If they're not happy about it, they will be vocal about it, and this is kind of what I said I kind of started with it. And see the ECW arena, see when you look back on it, I mean, we'll talk later on about when WWE rebranded the ECW, and then the first few shows they went back to that arena. It's a really good style of an arena for what they were wanting to do, you know, because you have like the old school type balconies with it. It's very close into the ring, you know, and when you've got that type of arena where your fans are that close, it just brings a much more electric atmosphere to it. I mean, Pro Wrestling Guerrilla, Scott, obviously, they do it. Yeah. The Battle of Los Angeles tournament, their fans are literally on the apron, and that is a red hot thing. So if you get something like that, and it works, but I think ECW, they were smart. Heyman was smart about it. He knew the hardcore stuff would work, but he would also chuck a lot of other stuff in there that wasn't getting done as much as it would later do a couple of years after it, and that would hook other forms of wrestling fans other than the ones who just wanted to see guys get battered over the head with chairs.
See, I found it quite. Sorry to jump in, Scott. I found it quite strange watching that documentary, because to me, as somebody who wasn't a loyal like ECW watcher, and even when I get into the wrestling, I've only really seen bits of ECW. I've not like went through and watched absolutely everything, week in, week out, like some folk do. But even when you see the when they had to then change their business at some point, and they brought like guys like Rey Mysterio and stuff like that, and that kind of Lucha Libre stuff, I was actually surprised that they were the ones that brought them across, because that's something I wasn't actually clued up on. I thought they were. I only really remember Ray mainly for WWE, but I knew he was also WCW and stuff like that as well. But I actually never knew that he was in ECW. I never knew they were responsible for bringing that kind of form of wrestling to the US. So having that kind of mix, like you say, Stephen, having the kind of hardcore but the kind of technical wrestling as well, I think that's great. That's something that would actually interest me more, if that was a company coming up just now.
Because if you look at all the guys they had, like you said, Rey Mysterio, Eddie Guerrero first got his thing in there. Chris Jericho, even he wasn't like coming from Mexico. He was obviously from the US. These guys first got their introductions here, and you even get the Japanese guys that were in as well. They used to use some of them too. So it was smart work from Heyman in terms of building his audience by knowing exactly what to do.
Well, you said, Stephen, about like the look of the ECW arena. I mean, Paul Heyman even says that he knew he couldn't compete production-wise with WCW and WWE, because they were billion-dollar organizations that could afford the best production and pyro and stuff like that. He knew he probably could try and outbest them with the best kind of wrestling. And that's the thing where ECW, as many people will tell you, it wasn't just blood and guts and weapons, barbed wire and things like that. They had technical wrestlers, like I mentioned, Too Cold Scorpio of his day was considered one of the best workers. Dean Malenko, Eddie Guerrero, Benoit. They brought in Mysterio and Psychosis, and that's why they had such an issue with WCW, because a lot of them were taken from WCW, and that's seen as their big exposure in the American market, when really some of them came to ECW first. I think that crowd in ECW, like you said, the hardcore fans, the people of that year will talk about tape trading, and these people would have like tape trades with like tapes from Japan, so they would have seen Benoit when he was like Wild Pegasus, or seen Jericho's work in Japan as Lionheart Chris Jericho. So it guaranteed when these guys came into ECW, they were going to get a great response.
See what you say about the production side of it as well, Scott. I mean, one thing from a wrestling point of view, you sometimes find that some companies' production, if it looks too slick, you doesn't feel like it works in wrestling. Sometimes WWE have that issue currently. The production can be so good at times, is so on point, but sometimes it looks too like stage TV and like this. Well, you kind of like, I know me personally currently, see when I look back at Attitude Era stuff, you know how with the on the Raws after the pay-per-views, where they would show the clips like the main event from the night before, and they would only do the wee stills, and you just hear the noises and that type of stuff. I thought that was class. Whereas currently now it's just like flash, flash, camera, flash, flash. Kevin Dunn ego trip that we would call it. So even ECW was kind of like a grunge type feel, and you kind of even looking back on it now, you're kind of like, oh yeah, that's retro, that's cool, that's different.
I like that. No, I like the fact that they admitted right away. They went, we can't compete, with the flashing lights and the pyro and stuff like that. So they put on a wrestling show. They get the fans involved. They keep the house lights on the whole way through. It's literally just about the wrestling. It's about the fighting. It's about beating people up, and that's what the fans could get into. And that's what I would get into as well. If I was going to that type of show, that's something that would interest me. You see about the kind of production value and the pyro and stuff. Sometimes that can mask, that can make up for people who aren't very good in the ring. Like we see in WWE just now, there's people who we don't actually care about in the ring, but they've probably got quite a decent entrance, or they've got all the kind of pyro and it makes them look like a star, but then they actually just let you down, as opposed to just going out there, no faff, no hassle, going out, doing your work, and that's the end of it. It's also what you're saying, Scott, about the arena, just to go back on it. I find it really funny when people now will slag other wrestlers. I think Randy Orton does it quite a lot when he slags people who came from kind of Japan and stuff like that in the indie scene. He'll talk to them about, wrestling at bingo halls and stuff. ECW was a bingo hall. That was a glorified bingo hall, and it worked better than any arena I've seen in a long time. So I don't even take that as like as a downside, wrestling at a bingo hall.
But with a couple of years of like kind of growing the fan base and gaining the momentum that they had, they eventually decided like the best way to compete is to go on pay-per-view, and WWE eventually takes notice of ECW because the 95 King of the Ring famously thought it was one of the worst pay-per-views of all time, even though in my opinion had one of the greatest endings, like Viscera sitting on the throne. During the final, the crowd are relentlessly chanting ECW, and so a year later in '96 at In Your House Mind Games, you have some ECW guys sitting front row and they're being acknowledged by the fans, and then you have them coming onto Raw and kind of feuding with Jerry Lawler, and all it's done is to help promote their first ever pay-per-view, Barely Legal, in April 13th, 1997. It was a great thing for ECW to kind of get this exposure, and also like they debuted on Raw. I believe the Raws they were featured on were in New York, so that's an ECW crowd, even though their base is in Philadelphia.
It was the Manhattan Center, the one where they actually officially invaded. I believe it was it Van Damme? And Van Damme was on the show. Van Damme was apparently it was good the way they worked it, because they kind of had Rob Van Dam was kind of playing this whole like he'd cross sides. You know, he was kind of the ECW guy in Raw, but he was kind of like working with Jerry Lawler type idea with it. So it was kind of he would go to the ECW shows, he'd be the heel, and he'd still kind of be the heel on Raw. It was a weird as opposed to the other way about, but it was an interesting relationship because we kind of criticise Vince now, rightly so at times, for not being a finger on the pulse and knowing what's going on. You know, sometimes many people have actually, I mean, even Jim Ross and Taz, two names obviously, Taz somebody we'll talk about in this show, criticise Vince for not acknowledging AEW. But back then, you know, ECW was a big thing, and he was right in about that and said, right, I'm going to get in and get these guys involved. And they kind of had this whole sort of it was some sort of talent exchange type thing idea of it, because obviously you'd have they had Van Damme and that type of stuff showing up on some Raws and that type of stuff. Van Damme wrestled a few matches over in ECW. Sorry, Al Snow was he was getting accustomed over there before he would actually officially sign with WWE. He was trying stuff as well. You mentioned Too Cool Scorpio earlier on, Scott. He would go to WWE and he would go back, I think, to ECW. I think he would actually, I'm sure he went back. There's a few names I'm trying to remember. You got the likes of Draws and that type of stuff would go there too. Even, obviously, we're talking well back before he obviously signed for WWE. Stone Cold Steve Austin, the stuff he was doing in ECW, that's when he developed the rattlesnake type character. He would go to WWE, they'd put that stupid ringmaster character on him, but then eventually go, no, they'd put him back to that, you know, the Stone Cold Steve Austin we all love. So it was good that it was getting, WWE were using it well. They were getting these guys that they were thinking going to be the future, kind of accustomed to wrestling on a regular basis. It's kind of similar to what they did with Evolve for a wee while in recent years as well.
Yeah, because like you said, RVD, he was appearing on Raw and he teased going to WWE. I think he had negotiations with him. He almost went to WCW. I think it got out and the ECW fans heard about it, and that he was used to help get heat on him. And that he basically, his gimmick was for a while, I'm just using ECW as a platform. He goes somewhere else, I'll earn me more money. And like on Barely Legal, he's only on Barely Legal because Lance Storm's original opponent got injured. He goes, you say I sold out by getting in this ring tonight when I wasn't booked to begin with. So it was really effective at helping build Van Damme up as a character, because he's one of the few people who never actually, even though he negotiated with people, he never actually officially left ECW.
I think it's quite it was quite strange looking back on that, and Vince actually getting them involved, because I think Jerry Lawler said, you know, this is another company who we are basically promoting another company's pay-per-view on our show, and they're like, we didn't know what was happening. A lot of folk actually at WWE never knew this was going to be happening, so that all of a sudden, next thing you know, they've got these guys, got Tommy Dreamer and that, like sitting in the front row, try to get involved, they're jumping the rails, and they're sitting going, what the hell's going on here? But it was smart because, again, I keep jumping forward, we know what happens with this, so it was a smart bit of business to get yourself aligned with a company like ECW, which you knew was going to be successful, but probably in the back of his mind knew that'll run its course. There's a few guys there that I can poach, and it'll make me look great if I've been the one that's promoted them, and it's still not worked, and then I've gave them a job. So it's probably really clever, forward thinking for Vince, which is something I thought I'd never say about Vince McMahon.
Yeah, they were basically, for a while, you can say they were kind of an unwilling developmental brand for both ECW both WWE and WCW, because as soon as somebody got big, seemed to get poached by one of the big two, and then someone else would come up. And then I think the issue is when we get to like the demise ECW, is that by the time they got to like 01 into 2000, they just didn't have anybody on the same level as the stars they had built before. But we'll go back to like 96, because they almost didn't get pay-per-view because of an incident that is covered quite perfectly in the most recent series of Dark Side of the Ring and the New Jack episode, and that's the mass transit incident. And obviously New Jack ended up getting taken to court, and Williams basically that gave anybody who just had doubts about ECW all the ammunition they needed to basically pull us from pay-per-view. Which by the way was absolute bullshit. Like, see the fact that this is something I never really knew like about. Like I've said already, I've only really come across this in that documentary when I watched it, and since then I've went back and I've looked, I've kind of googled the incident and stuff like that. The fact that he got taken to court over that, after it was proven that this guy had lied about his age, got in the ring, and you know, that could have had a massive, or it did have a massive impact on the company, had a massive impact on New Jack, but also it had a massive impact on that boy's family as well. But the fact that we're still talking about this to this day, you know, when we look back on it, it was such a big thing to happen. And the fact that ECW got dragged down after that, and all the stuff that happened after this, I think is really, really harsh on ECW for somebody lying about their age ultimately.
At the same time though, you look less on the New Jack side of things. I mean, when you look back on this stuff, it's a rough incident, but you look back on the side of things, this is why I think in any sort of company that involves this, you know, the rigorous activity that WWE wrestling does, like so your UFC, your boxing, you need some of these protocols going on in the background, you need these type of things going on to be checked. So the fact that you get this guy who just walks in and just goes, "Hi, I'm such and such age, I've done this and that," and then they go, "Right, you're in." It's just like, nah, you shouldn't. That part of things shouldn't be. I mean, that's the thing that kind of it'd be like somebody like 10 years ago us walked into blooming, you know, an ICW show and going like, I do the same thing, and they just go, you go wrestle. You need to have some sort of verification to it, you know. And when you are a company at that point in time as ECW, well, they're not fully established on the corporate side of it. Especially wrestling in general wasn't a corporate thing back then. This is before WWE, you know, became a listed company on the stock exchange as well. So it's a risky move to do, and they are lucky on it. But read stuff about it in general. It sounds like a rough thing to do to any former wrestler, let alone a guy who'd never actually done it before and was underage.
I think it was because he lied about who trained him and stuff as well, wasn't it? Like he seemed to have his story pretty much nailed on to get himself in this match. Like everything that he said sounded convincing. You know, he get trained off of this guy, he trained under this guy, he worked with this company before. You know, it gave them a load of shite. But I get your point. It's a different time. What year was this? Was this 96? Did you say 97?
It was 96. Because they said December 96, the pay-per-view got pulled when it was scheduled for early 97. It was through fan support that they got it back. So
this is 24 years ago this incident happened. You know, the world was different at that point. You know, there wasn't as many protocols in anything as there is now. You know, if anything now it's probably a bit too much, but you know, people are covering their backs as much as they can. But back then it was, if somebody came to you with a legitimate story and you bought it and they were convincing about it, then you know, it's quite easy to get caught out in that sense.
And like, it's very telling in that ECW documentary on the network. Paul Heyman and like the Devon, because he was in that match, talk about it, but like you get no footage of it, and they try to quickly move past it as quick as possible. Whereas the Dark Side of the Ring documentary shows you basically why, because like they show you how deeply like he cuts that guy. Because like even though he lied about his age, apparently he basically asked New Jack something, and New Jack just immediately took it as disrespect. And as you learn in that documentary, New Jack had a short fuse. So like it's one thing to be in there untrained, lying about your age, but then you're in there with somebody who probably the most dangerous person at that point to be in the ring with, because he seemingly was so easy to piss off.
That boy,
wrestling's full of characters like that.
That boy actually died 5 years later, didn't he? After that, but it was nothing related to that. It was like a gastric band operation that went wrong or something like that. Like something stupid.
Yeah, it was complications to do with his weight, but They would get their pay-per-view. They had Barely Legal 1997, and what's good about this is actually you see some behind the scenes stuff with this in the documentary Beyond the Mat. It came out a couple of years later. You have Paul Heyman basically giving this big speech to the entire roster, telling them about how they worked so hard to get there and basically go out there and put on a great show. And you have Terry Funk ending the night as ECW champion. And to go back to like the deathmatch show we did a few months ago, we talked about how ECW kind of took some of the concepts that were used in the Japanese deathmatch scene, but some of that was influenced by the Texas deathmatch scene, which was started by the likes of Terry Funk. So when you think about it, Terry Funk is the most fitting person to end that show as ECW champion, whereas nowadays people look at it and think, why is this old guy the champion of your promotion when there's so many young guys you could put the belt on?
See when you look back on that pay-per-view card, obviously Funk has to win a triple threat match to get in that position, and see if you look at him and the two guys he's in with, 23 years later it just sounds horrendous. It's like Funk versus Sandman versus Stevie Richards, and Stevie Richards is accompanied by the Blue Meanie and Hollywood Nova, better known as Simon Dean, when they were the Blue World Order. It's just like, you look back at that, you're like, well, it's got a fantastic match in it between Van Damme and Lance Storm, though. That's a
Do you see on that triple threat though? See, again, watching the documentary and Stevie was talking about it. Like, not you, Stevie, other Stevie that was actually in the match. He was talking about being in this match and stuff. See nowadays, if that match happened, we would be screaming for Stevie to win that. Like, if Terry Funk won that, we would riot. Like, it's just so different how times are, because we'd be going, the young guy coming through, getting a chance. It's a wee bit like the kind of Daniel Bryan WrestleMania stuff, wasn't it? Having to go through Triple H to get to the triple threat at the end. It's the same kind of idea. You champion the underdog, so it's weird that the Terry Funk thing was, people were behind that idea more than the up and coming guy.
It's also because like the champion at the time was Raven, and Stevie was kind of his underling, so it would have been a story for him to go on and then face his kind of master at the time. And you've got to think Stevie had to do a lot of the work, because Sandman was probably pissed by the time he get to the ring, as he was for most of these matches. And in the Beyond the Mat documentary, they show Terry before this match going to the doctor talking about how basically the cartilage in one of his knees is pretty much gone, and he goes, if I get a new knee, will I be in constant pain? And the doctor goes, I don't know why you're not in constant pain now. So like, thinking he got to that match with like barely any functioning knees.
Wrestlers are weird, man. They're so weird.
Terry Funk, it's unbelievable the fact that has he retired again? I've honestly lost track. You lose track. We're going to get this with Campbell on this podcast. He's going to retire in 3 weeks. After he has a really bad first week of the draft next season. And then if he's in it,
it can't be much worse than me, mate. It can't be much worse than me.
Well, that's very true.
He retired once or twice after this, and then in 2006, at the second One Night Stand, he's in a tag match on that show. So he says he's retired for now. I wouldn't be surprised. Post-pandemic, shows start running again. Fucking Terry Funk's out there getting himself booked.
They'll be booked against, like, I don't know, what's his face, Mad Cut or something like that in some British show.
So it was a big moment for ECW, this first ever pay-per-view, and then they kind of start running kind of almost semi-regularly, these pay-per-views, like every couple of months. And when you think about it, it's kind of a crowded market for them to be in, because WCW and WF are about to start getting really hot. Like NWO started, we're not quite at the Austin moment yet. Austin's not won the title yet, but he's getting close to there. And they're running a pay-per-view every month, and these guys are running pay-per-views every 2 or 3 months. So if you're a hardcore wrestling fan wanting to follow everything that's going on, like this is in the days pre-network, we actually had to pay full price for every show. Like, it was costing you a fair bit.
Definitely. But they had this kind of run from 97 to 99 for ECW. They were red hot with a lot of stuff, and you look at some of the guys who came through there. They built them so legitimately, it was unreal. You get the likes of, we talked about likes of Sandman, Sabu. I mean, these are guys who in a normal wrestling company at this point in time would have got absolutely nowhere. We talked about Van Damme, who became one of the biggest stars in the whole of the industry a decade or so later. The likes of Taz. Raven and Tommy Dreamer have one of the best feuds of the 90s of this whole thing. They just absolutely Raven's just you look back at a lot of the moments Raven had in ECW. There's that infamous moment where he crucifies Sandman on the same show that Kurt Angle's there to apparently sign a contract, and Kurt Angle just goes, "I want nothing to do with you, mob."
I think that was very telling how even the ECW crowd went, oh, wait a minute. Like, see when they're going, oh, I think you probably need to rethink what you've done there.
And Raven had to go back out and apologise. You can tell he doesn't want to apologise. He doesn't think he's done anything wrong. But he does it. And you have the Kurt Angle controversy around the crucifixion the same year as mass transit. And Paul even perfectly sums up as, like, if my father wasn't a lawyer, I could never have done ECW for as long as we did. Because they got sued so many times.
He lived on the edge with the ECW stuff. I mean, everything he did, he pushed the boundaries to such an extreme, you know. But this is at the point he was still in his late 20s, early 30s at this point in time. So he was willing to go for it. You know, he'd worked for WCW at that point in time. I don't think he'd been in WWE at that point. So he just thought, I'm balls to the wall, do it. And you listen to some of the stuff he actually says when he's on some of the promos he cuts himself, or he just, like, when he goes in on the TV networks at times as well. It's like he comes across purely as a guy living in the moment with no plan. He says, I'll plan for today and I'll deal with tomorrow.
Well, he did say before that he wasn't the best, like, kind of business-wise. He was great at being a wrestling promoter, but the business side of it, he wasn't very good at. He wasn't clued up on it. But that probably, you kind of need to be somewhere in the middle, because if you understand the business, you understand what you can and can't do. Whereas if you think that you can just go in there and do whatever you want, which you found out he did, you know, he says he never knew that the crucifixion thing was happening. Of course he knew the crucifixion thing was going to happen. Like, of course he knew that was going to happen. He's backed out of it when it's all come out and everybody's been raging about it. But he knew fine well that was going to happen. But he was chancing it, he was pushing it. He was seeing how far he could get and what he could get away with. Because all it took was for that crucifixion thing to go the opposite way. So rather than people being disgusted by it and hating it, people could have been disgusted by it but thought it was quite cool, like the way they'd done it. And then before you know it, you take off for there. So, you know, it's the kind of fine lines that he would tread, and like we see, a lot of them went tits up, right?
Yeah, he tries to, like, pass it off as, like, oh, I didn't know it was going to happen. Well, if anything, that makes him look more incompetent, that he's the guy in charge of the show. Exactly. And says he doesn't know what happened. Like, he had to know what happened, because I heard stories that it was Sandman who built that cross in his garage. So I think he was a carpenter in his day job. And he wasn't earning enough in ECW to make a full-time living.
And how did he get it in the arena? Bring it in just on his back? Like, nobody noticed him bringing it in, putting it onto the ring? No.
See, when you mentioned the business side as well, I didn't really know. But see, actually, when they were running on TV, I mean, these guys had no advertising coming in. You know, see, if you are a guy on national TV, you want to have you want these advertising coming in both from the network and for you, so you get a slice. So obviously, when they pulled a plug on a TV deal, you've got absolutely nothing in the background. You know, Nothing's there. No wonder these guys weren't getting paid, which obviously was the thing that led them to go down the drain and down the Swanee.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because, like, they're doing well on pay-per-view. I mean, they go into 98. They have a Heatwave 98, which a lot of people consider their best pay-per-view. And, like, you seem like the next natural step would be TV, but, like, very few networks wanted to touch them. And then they got on TNN, but then it seems like TNN kept basically fucking them around. Like, they didn't like this, so they didn't like that. Paul even claims that he wouldn't even let people say that they hated each other when they were in feuds. Like, oh, I strongly dislike you, or whatever. And you see Paul Heyman this time, like, he looks like in the space of, like, 2 years, he's aged 10. Like, he's all unshaven, he's getting wee grey hairs, and there's also the stress of everything that's going on. And he cuts, like you said, that infamous promo where he basically threatened TNN one, take us off air, because they knew they were publicly negotiating with Raw to put them on their network, and basically said they used us as a guinea pig to see if wrestling could work on their network.
Mm-hmm. Well, they kind of did, you know, because that led to then Raw's, you know, best ever period at the time, you know, during the Attitude Era. So there was an appetite. You look at the figures for Raw, WCW combined in 99, 2000. They were getting about 12 million viewers. I mean, last night's Raw, well, last night, Monday night, the other time of recording, got 1.6 million. So at the time, it was they did test the waters, and it did, because then Raw had the edgier product there as well, so it kind of worked in that favour at all of that one. But as WCW would show a couple of years later, if you want to be a long-term main player, as WCW are, you need to have some sort of TV deal, because you've got indie companies have got, they don't really, they can kind of go show to show, but when you want to run monthly, weekly, more on a regular basis, you need that regular form of income, and without, especially when you've got your own branch of talent or roster, if you've just got independent guys coming time from time, you can kind of tweak what you're doing, but if you want to rely on the same people every week, it's eventually going to mount up, and you look at them, some of the amounts that they owed to some of the guys at the end of it,
I feel a bit sorry for them to an extent with the TV deal, because the TV company didn't help them at all. They never promoted them. I think Heyman said that there was the only adverts for ECW that were on that network was during ECW. It was the only time they put a trailer on for an ECW show, and it was during ECW. So they never put it on any other time to let folk know when it was going to be on. Putting it on during their kind of higher score, even during Raw. See, once they got Raw, or just WWE in general, there's nothing stopping the TV company putting a trailer on for a different wrestling company that they've got in their program. They could quite easily do that, and that would capture. If you get 12 million folk, like you say, Stephen, watching Raw, put on one ECW advert at one of the breaks during this 2-3 hour show, however long it was at the time. Chuck on one advert, and people will go, all right, give that a try.
Especially the way they were working together. It wasn't like they were in direct competition.
Aye.
It was like they had some sort of working relationship. So if you went to Vince and go, as part of your deal, we're going to stick an ECW advert on an hour or two, they'd be like, all right, fair enough.
Yeah, they wouldn't even care, because they'd actively try to promote ECW anyway. Mm-hmm. So it's not like it's going to make a difference to them. It's not. ECW were never going to take over WWE, but they could have been more sustainable, and that's the thing. They could have been more sustainable if they got TV money, if they got viewers in, as long as they had the exposure. So the TV company pretty much shafted them, to be fair. But I liked was it the kind of promo that Heyman done on the TV deal, where he was talking about the network, and he was basically just saying, he's like, they don't want us. He said they're going to take us off soon, we're waiting to be taken off, and he properly laid into them on his show. That just showed you, again, that's probably the guy who doesn't understand the business side of things, but at the same time you can understand his frustrations with it as well.
And then they voiced their displeasure through their storylines, because they brought in Don Callis as Cyrus, basically the network executive. Basically, whenever they needed a heel or somebody basically stomp a hardcore match because they knew the network wouldn't like it, they brought in Cyrus. They know that's not what the network wants, and a thing that hurt them quite quickly when they started on TNN, quite soon after the Dudleys and Taz get signed, and so they do the big angle with the Dudleys leaving, and then Taz has to drop the ECW title, and then right at the same time RVD breaks his leg and has to leave for like 3 months as TV champion. I believe they were setting up for him to win the ECW title and unify both belts. Mm-hmm. So you lose Taz, the Dudleys and RVD from about the start of 2000, and they tried their best because they had like the just incredible Jerry Lynn, Steve Corino in the main event, and then you had Rhino debuting, and like he did quite a lot. Like it wasn't the same, and like with so many stars like leaving, because obviously there was no TV deal, so they were doing what they thought was best for them in the long term. And like you said, without a TV deal, much like WCW, if there's no one to see your product, then it's not really going to grow.
I mean, the one as well, Scott, the one name you didn't mention, and the Mike Awesome got to WCW, that one, it really hit them as well, because he had the belt at the time. So it was that bad that he had to go on an ECW show and drop the belt to Taz, who had signed with WWE. So you had the WWE guy beating a WCW guy for the ECW title, and then Taz would drop it. It was crazy, but that was the thing, they weren't tied into any contracts or anything like that at all. They were just, it was all handshake agreements like buddy with Heyman type stuff. And as you said, they tried, but it's always like if you lose so many of your top stars at the one time, you're going to struggle, you know. And that's the that was the thing with them.
I think the final nail in the coffin was the Dudleys, I reckon, because they had quite a big kind of pool backstage as well. I'm pretty sure Bubba was running, you know, the kind of business side of things for ECW as well at one point, like, and then it got to the point where they weren't getting paid. They had to look at what was happening. They did get paid, so Dudleys were getting paid, but a lot of folk weren't, and they could kind of see where it was going. And they always get the offer to jump ship, and they goes to payment. And I can't remember who it was that got interviewed. They said that the Dudleys only asked for.
I think it was Bubba that said that he was like, if he had offered us $1 more than Vince, we would have stayed, and Heyman couldn't do it. So
aye, and do you know? I don't even know if it was $1 more than Vince. I think it was just $1 pay rise. You know, just to show them that, you know, he wanted them to be there, and he was like, I can't do it. He said, I really can't do it, and that's when Bubba was like, this is a sinking ship. This is going down any day now. So, you know, like you say, you start losing your talent, and that's when you go down the pan. But what was interesting though about the fact that they were losing money, I don't know where this money was going, and this is obviously somebody, you know, I'm watching these shows on this documentary, and they're talking about it, and they're going, we're still selling out shows. They said, we're still selling out all these shows. So how can they not afford to pay folk? Like, did they run up that much debt that they couldn't afford any overheads with that, or what?
The liabilities, I'm reading this just here, the liabilities they had was $8.88 million, and they had 1.38 assets. So they could have got rid of everything, and I don't know, they must have just ran so much bill, overpaid so many wrestlers, you know. It's just a case of nothing was bringing that back, you know. I would think it was bringing them back if they got a good TV deal, but given the type of company they were never going to get the high-end TV deal. They were going to get chucked on at 10 o'clock at night or something like that.
Aye.
Or 11 o'clock at night. Very late.
It was like, at the same time, like a lot of the guys you hear talking about like their deals recently, they weren't on official contract. The amount of times you hear them say, I was on a handshake agreement with Paul, and like Lance Storm said he had a 3 striking out deal where, like, if the check bounced like more than 3 times, like he basically said, I'm out of here. And he did eventually go to like WCW, and like he said, I think Paul Heyman even left a few months before he said he was officially declared dead. And the last few months were kind of run by Tommy Dreamer, because then Heyman would show up on Raw, and he didn't go there with the intention of being a commentator. He apparently showed up there as a creative member, and then just basically was 1 week, we don't have anybody to fill in for Lawler, like, so away you go on air, because he done commentary a little bit in WCW alongside JR, and then ECW basically goes to bankruptcy court, and it's WWE that basically has to bail them out, and that's how WWE ends up with all the trademarks and the owning the rights to ECW. I'm pretty sure they might have spent more in bankruptcy court for ECW than they did buying WCW around that same time.
I think so.
Yeah, and it wasn't just like Heyman, and I think Heyman's parents had put quite a bit of money into ECW, so they were like getting their money back. Paul was getting some money back, and quite a few ECW guys got signed around that time. Rhino, Spike Dudley, Tommy Dreamer, and Raven were all coming into the company, and the ECW is basically officially declared dead in around about March 2001, around the same time as WCW. So within the space of a week or so, 2 of the 3 major companies are gone, and WWE basically remains the #1 company.
The only company.
Yeah.
Until the Indies picked up a wee bit and Ring of Honor came in, but yeah, it was a crazy month, that one in March. We had the two of them go bust, and we have probably one of the greatest WWE pay-per-views ever, WrestleMania 17.
Because it's weird, because like there are a lot of the guys in ECW, there were some who basically knew, I'm not going to get signed by W, they're not going to be interested in me, and their other main alternative, WCW, closes the exact same time, so they basically, a lot of people wondering like, what am I going to do? Wrestling, I'm going to find like a regular 9-to-5 job. But it wouldn't be officially the end of ECW. Would see ECW back in some way, but this time under the WWE banner. But before we got to One Night Stand, ECW was featured kind of, I wouldn't say prominently, but they were featured on WWE TV in 2001 as they paired with WCW as part of the Invasion. Although a lot of people would be forgiven for forgetting anybody but RVD was involved in that, because RVD is the one who got the shine. And a lot of people think the death knell for ECW and the Invasion was revealing, oh, look at our new owner, Stephanie McMahon.
Yeah, before the Stephanie McMahon reveal was, before they hated it, it was, at the time you weren't too bad, but no, you hit the nail on the head there, Scott. I mean, you get WWE back. When WWE bought WCW, at the time everybody was like, oh, we're going to get all these dream matches we've never seen before. It's one of the most talked about things in wrestling, the Invasion angle, because whenever they thought we were going to see Goldberg come in, we thought Sting was going to come in, we thought Hogan and Nash and that were going to come back, but Flair coming back, but they were all tied into these lucrative contracts with TNT or Warner, AOL Warner it was at the time, so they couldn't get half these guys. So WWE realised, like, we're going to need to build this around Booker T and DDP. No offence to the two of them, but they weren't at the same level as the guys I just mentioned, so they had to bulk up a wee bit. So naturally, because ECW just went bust, they thought, let's bring these guys in. But you realised it was a bit off when they started. But the guys that signed the WWE were going back across, and these were the guys who were the main star power. I mean, that first Invasion pay-per-view, and the ECW representatives were the Dudleys and Rhino. So they didn't really have any major names who could go up against the likes of a Stone Cold, Steve Austin, a Rock, a Kane, an Undertaker. So, as you said, the best thing to have came from the ECW side of things was 100% undoubtedly Rob Van Dam.
Funny, that whole alliance thing, it's, some people love it, some people hate it. For me, it brought the best moment in Stone Cold Steve Austin history.
Brilliant.
Oh, so good. Like, that's the one thing I remember. See, somebody mentions the alliance, I just remember that clip of them all getting beat up in the ring, and JR's on commentary shouting, "We need Austin." He shows up in the car, he starts beating the shit out of folk backstage, and then the glass shatters and he comes out, and I'm just like, sitting and watching the telly. I'm like, get in, I watched it today. I put on a...
It's so good, but see when you get older and you start to think about things a bit more, you're like, Austin turning makes no sense at all, because he got patched by WCW. He left ECW on his own, but it's. I remember the first night that actually happened. I remember when they all came out the crowd. It was Van Dam and Dreamer. I think it came out the crowd. I actually remember at that point in time. The rest of them were kind of on the roster at that point, so they were all involved in some match. Heyman's brilliant on commentary at that point. He's just like, we're invading and that type of stuff, and it's just he adds a layer. I don't really know. You know what WWE are like? It's like McMahon versus McMahon. This is our thing, but they could have just stuck Heyman and just left Heyman as that role, and he was working for Shane. We didn't need to have Stephanie in there. Stephanie didn't have to. I still don't get Stephanie in that. I don't like. Especially Triple H was injured. If Triple H was there, they could have had something. But yeah.
Like on the Raw, was an episode of Raw where ECW showed up and then Heyman gets involved and everybody seems enthusiastic about it. And then I think for on that same Raw they tease it's going to be ECW, WCW, WF all going at it. And then they say, oh, by the way, WCW and ECW joined forces. And then people are like, okay, that's still interesting. And then SmackDown say, oh yeah, now Stephanie's here. And people think, so it is basically like McMahon's against each other again. And like he said, like quite a few of the ECW guys still felt like WWF guys because they've been there for a while, like the Dudleys, Taz, Raven, and then you have WWF guys who have no connection to really who don't really have much of a connection to WCW, or if they did, they got treated badly there, like Austin. And they barely even talk about Austin's ECW connection when he turned, and they have like Christian and Kurt Angle joining, just because they're heels, so all the heels must be associated with the alliance. And like you said, RVD is probably the best guy who got a spotlight, because he, No Mercy 2001, he's in the main event, triple threat with Austin and Angle for the title. And I think it was a show, he's one of the true stars they made, because Booker T got kind of fed to The Rock, and DDP got fed to Undertaker, and they weren't brave enough to push Sean Stasiak as they should have. They'll follow me on Twitter, so he does.
Van Dam even before that match at No Mercy, Van Damme and Jeff Hardy have a great set of matches. It's the best match on that Invasions one is day 2, and then they have a subsequent ladder match at the SummerSlam after it. It kind of made Jeff as well, because we still kind of really just knew him as a tag team wrestler at this point in time. So to put these two guys together, and then they go into team a year later when Van Damme became was on a regular on the WWE roster. It's ECW. It kind of sums up, because ECW did build stars in a way, and then they went to WWE and nothing really happened with a lot of them. So he's the exception to the rule. And we looked, I would say he's still going strong, but is he really going strong?
I find it quite funny. We're a bit move on to it as well, Scott, with the whole one night stand stuff. But just touch on what Stephen was saying about Stephanie getting involved and stuff. See, if WWE were smart about it, right, they could have quite easily kept ECW after they bought it. They could have kept ECW in its form, had the backing, financially to pay all the guys and stuff like that, and have that as your kind of NXT, which we see now, kind of developmental. Back in the day, that's when they could have done that. They could have kept the ECW arena, the ECW name, everything about it, just with WWE money in the back. The same crowd. Keep Heyman in charge. Just keep him a wee bit more in line, so he doesn't get you thrown off TV. But ultimately, keep him in charge of that. And still run ECW, and that could have been your feeder ground. At that point, you would have had a great fan base for that, and it would have been well ahead of the time. Because how long after this did it take them to get actual NXT up and running? Like over 10 years properly to get it up and running. They could have done this years ago.
I think they didn't buy the assets, which included the video library, until 2003. I think they just had the contracts of the wrestlers, so I don't think they could have fully went through it, and I think they didn't really realise the potential of it until the first one night stand, and even then, when they did know the potential of it, they didn't know what to do with it. As we'll speak about it.
Yeah, like you said, not officially buying the assets yet. That's why when you have the invasion, you've only got the WF titles and the WCW belts that they brought over. Nothing related to ECW. You don't have the ECW championship involved, because also they couldn't have it involved yet. And when you think about it, ECW is technically responsible for bringing in the big SmackDown Fist entrance, because you have the moment where the Oval entrance is retired because Rhino gores Chris Jericho through it, because Stephanie McMahon has set Rhino on Jericho because he keeps making jokes at Stephanie's expense, and then that brings in the big SmackDown Fist. And we've been mentioning that Rise and Fall of ECW documentary, and it's the success of that documentary and the DVD sales that is credited with the idea of W thinking, well, maybe there's still an appetite for ECW, and they bring ECW back for one night stand. Yeah, it seems like it'll be a one-off pay-per-view, and it's weird. It's only 4 years on since ECW closed. It's weird to have nostalgia for something that hasn't been gone that long. I think it's a product of the time, because in the mid 2000s, it was felt at that time, with the lack of competition, WWE got very kind of complacent, and it really started to irritate a lot of the hardcore fans.
It's this one night stand, I remember it at the time. It is one of the best pay-per-views I ever remember watching around about that time. This is all, if you ask a lot of wrestling fans who get into it in the attitude there, the kind of 2006, 2007, 2000, that kind of late that decade was the point they were kind of oh, this is a wee bit naff, So, but they had this, and it was good, because they brought Joey Styles back. Not really mentioned Joey Styles, but he was a screamer. If you look back on it, he just screamed in the mic, but it worked. They put with Mick Foley as well, which kind of did the part and part of it, and you felt like it seemed like they were doing stuff on the show that were genuine angles, that type of thing. We had Lance Storm faking retirement type idea, and then kind of doing a swerve on Jericho. You had Super Crazy being Super Crazy. You had the match between Awesome and Tanaka. Was it Tanaka? That pretty much, Tanaka. That the crowd were shitting on it at the start, and then it was an absolute world class match. It's a shame, obviously they do not forget the ECW crowd with Mike Awesome, but it's just they were clever with it. They did the hardcore stuff in the match. They brought back a bit of nostalgia and they combined it with their current programming as well, with this whole stuff with the invading WWE stars. That promo that we had at the break with Heyman, you know, it's one of the finest promos that's ever been cut in wrestling. The lines he was doing on it, you know, just screaming Matt Hardy at Edge. And the line to JBL, it's like, you were only champion for a year because Triple H won't work justice. It's like, it's so good. It's just everything combined in it. We got Stone Cold at the end as well.
It's really funny. See, looking at the card for One Night Stand in 2005, and then you skip a year to the card for One Night Stand in 2006. They've just totally given up on it. Like the first year, you're thinking brilliant. It's like ECW guys that are in it, superb. But then you go to the next one, it's like Kurt Angle and Randy Orton. Like, why are they on One Night Stand? Who else was on it? RVD and Cena, fair enough. Edge and Lita.
The Taz versus King for the millionth time.
Aye. I mean,
they just threw that in every blooming time. It was all like, it was like a summer thing. It was like a recurrent thing, you know.
I know, but it was. It seemed like they just kind of they had the good moment in 2005, and then as we've become accustomed to, WWE just made an arse again the following year. You know, the Cena stuff was good because the reaction Cena got was brilliant at One Night Stand in the 2006, because the crowd were pure RVD loyals, and Cena, he's polarising at the best of times, but even then, at that point, he was getting abused in this.
There's an iconic moment at the start of the match where Cena does his usual. He goes to throw his top into the crowd, and the crowd just chuck it back at him, and he tries it again. So it's like, oh my god! Could you imagine if Cena won that match?
Oh, he would have made it out of the building.
He wouldn't get out. He would not have got out.
It's absolutely nuts. But I think, as you say, Ryan, this is the kind of point. Like the year before, it was like, right, we've got a DVD. We brought this documentary out. We're going to do this pay-per-view and try and make a bit of money off of this. But because it was so universally praised, it was kind of like, could we do something with this? I know, and that obviously, this going at the pay-per-view, it was announced it was coming back as a third brand, that type of stuff. Kurt Angle had been announced as a member of the brand, then subsequently left WWE like a month later, which didn't really make work. So it was kind of like, right, this is going to be what the thing is. We're going to need to do something with it. But I think, as you both said as well, myself have said, it's like they didn't know what to do with it. There was so many conflicting stuff. Vince wanted to do one thing. Apparently Shane wanted to bring it back in the way it was. So it was kind of like conflicting things about, and it's just like, you know, as we saw, and then the year after this, and then the years to come, it just kind of, they just didn't know what they were doing.
Like, the thing with Shane, he wanted to be like an internet exclusive show, which wasn't really a thing at the time. Would kind of, a lot of companies are doing that, being internet exclusive or being exclusive on a streaming service, because it would allow them to keep ECW kind of the feel of what fans loved about it. A couple of things I'll say about 05, like, it's a great slice of nostalgia. The two negatives I have about the One Night Stand 05 is the fact that they put Benoit and Guerrero kind of quickly after the Heyman promo, because the fans are still chanting up at the balcony and not paying attention to the match, and you can tell Guerrero's kind of not caring at this point. And also, it's hard to listen to Joey Styles' commentary during the Mike Awesome match, because he's still quite bitter about how Awesome left. At one point he says about Awesome taking his own life, and then considering Awesome died a few years later, it's kind of hard to look back on. And the thing with 06 is, I think they decided, okay, we're making this a third brand, so they used One Night Stand to kind of set that up. And they felt like, we need WWE guys to build it up and give it more star power. To say about the main event of that show, the John Cena match, I think it's one of Cena's best matches, and it's very similar to the Punk match in a lot of ways, in that we can say about how WWE made mistakes by never turning Cena heel all we want. But I think if he wasn't so polarising, that match and the match with Punk may not have been as good as they were, because the fans are integral parts to both of those matches.
Yep.
See, looking now in 2020, when he's not as active as he was, you look back on Cena, you're like, we wasted that man, because he is as a character, as when he wrestled, he could wrestle. You know, he was polarizing, but he got a reaction. He was mainstream. It's like you look back now and you're like, we could do him back at times, you know. But yeah, you're right, Scott. If he didn't have that polarizing reaction, this would have just been him and RVD having a standard match. Pop would not be as big, you know, and it would not have been looked back on the same way.
And then ECW makes its debut on Sci-Fi. RVD looks like he's finally got that moment that he should have gotten already, where he's the ECW champion and the WWE champion at the same time. He originally was going to throw away the WWE belt, but he jokingly went, "I like this one. Look, it spins." And his potheads are easily amused, apparently. And then also he got pulled over on possession charges and had to drop both belts. And a clear sign of how WWE was going to handle ECW was on the first episode of the Sci-Fi edition. The first match, in big quotation marks, was the Zombie versus the Sandman.
The Zombie. You know, it's you look back on it and you're like, what? I mean, you get the Sandman. Sandman makes sense, you know. Even though, let's be brutally honest, by 2006, Sandman was bollocks.
Mate, to be fair, Sandman was bollocks towards NDCW anyway. Like when you look back on it,
he took bumps. You know, I watched it. I watched. He's got a very enjoyable match in WCW in '99 against Bam Bam Bigelow. It's actually quite good. And Spring Stampede that year, but it's a hardcore match. They battle lumps at each other, but. He was his entrance. He was always the entrance, because as Scott, you mentioned earlier on, he was pissed by the time he got to the ring. He was pissed. He was gushing for the heat. I'm surprised he could walk to go anywhere in. The point that WWE drafted up to Raw, it was like, why are you putting this guy anywhere else in your product? If you're gonna either keep him there or boot him. But they eventually booted him. But Sandman.
The best part about him was his entrance, and WWE weren't willing to pay for Metallica. So they gave Sandman the most generic music you've ever heard, so you could even enjoy his entrances anymore.
WWE blooming cut Madonna when they put ICW on the network, so you can't really be surprised there. But it's just like there was so much stuff that they did at the start that I think they were trying to bridge the line, and it didn't really work. It didn't really work the way they said, because they had the Kelly debut with the Extreme Expose.
Literally took the words out of my mouth there, mate. Took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say two words, both the same word. Kelly. It was
I was 14 when this came out.
When was this?
2006. Into 2006.
I was 13. Superb.
They were going to an audience, and then. It was a case of like, we've got this guy Mike Knox. How can we make everybody hate him? There we go.
Good looking bird.
I mean, at the time, you know, obviously it's not a thing for the current era, but at the time it was risky. It was on the edge. Teenage.
You know, it was funny. See, when I was 13 watching this, right? Somebody who I didn't quite understand the whole kayfabe thing that was going on at the time. I genuinely thought she was going to date one day. I genuinely thought I was going to see it, and that's why I watched it every single week. I thought this will be the week that it'll happen. It fucking never happened.
They went really crossover one week. They brought Candice Michelle in to do it with her, and that's when I thought somebody showed up and battered Mike Knox that night. I can't remember who it was.
I think it may have been Sandman.
Was it Sandman?
I think so, yeah. And then Knox went into a partnership with Tess for some reason.
They put Kelly with a weird partnership. You mind the point she was going out with Balls Mahoney?
Aye.
I mean, of all the people, I mean, we know personality does make a difference. I can speak for that. Brian, you can speak for that as well.
Shut your face, you. Shut your face.
But you just kind of look at it, you're like, it doesn't really look like a personality guy, Balls. No offence, but nearly Mike Knox, to be fair. I don't know how, but it's an example. They were trying stuff, and it was like it wasn't working. And at the same time, they were still. You could see they were trying to build something. I mean, the best example is CM Punk and ECW that ever is. They were trying to build something there.
Yeah, they tried stuff. I mean, Punk is a prime example, and like Heyman especially wanted to make Punk the guy of ECW, and we come to one of the biggest failures of the WWE run of ECW, which is December to Dismember. I mean, we talked about the main event in our Elimination Chamber history show, but like the best match on the show featured no ECW guys. It was the Hardys versus M&M, which is a solid opener, but like, and you've got Daivari versus Tommy Dreamer, and Paul Mahoney, as we mentioned, versus Matt Striker, and what Striker called an extreme enforcement of the rules match. And Heyman wanted Punk to win the Chamber. He wanted to choke Big Show out and have Big Show go out first to think, God, we're going to have a new champion. And Vince went, yeah, but Bobby Lashley's big and has big muscles. And
I think the thing that annoyed a lot of the hardcore ECW fans is they had the angle where they took Sabu at the match and replaced him with Hardcore Holly. It's just like, and the match was pretty much, other than Punk, it was you could still class Van Damme as an ECW guy, but it was mostly the WWE mid-card of the early of that decade. They had Test, they had Hardcore Holly, the Big Show, or the Big Slow as he was then time, because he was absolutely, could barely lift his horns on his body. But you always think, you know how these type of pay-per-views, they try to do nowadays the pre-show match, they try to make it a good one to entice you in. The dark match from this pay-per-view was a man we talked about in the first half, Stevie Richards, taking on Rene Dupree. When they tried to make Dupree like the phenom of ECW back then, it's like, Dupree was this guy. Dupree was a guy that were like, we want to do something with you, but you have zero personality and you can't wrestle.
Do you know, this was this is back in 2006, December 2006. I'm just looking through the card just now, and a guy I've totally forgot about, Kevin Thorne. Man, mind that guy. That's just literally like a less scary Baron Corbin. That's like a pure nobody character.
Do you remember who he was before Kevin Thorne?
Is it Mordecai or something like that?
Mordecai, aye. I was amazed that these two guys were the same. I remember that debut. It was like, was it Judgment Day 2004 or something like that? Something been awful, and then he was gone within a week. And then the year after, they thought, right, he's not getting over as much. What are we going to do? Let's cut his hair.
Yep.
Like,
I don't think about the Mordecai thing is they stopped it because, like he said, oh, you're being too much like Undertaker. And the whole purpose of bringing him in as Mordecai was to eventually have him face the Undertaker. So
the other guy on this card that they thought was great. He'd actually maybe work in the current day that UFC's a bit more. It's Sylvester Terkay. You know, like an MMA type fighter type guy. They put him with Elijah Buck, and Elijah Buck got so much more over than he did.
He was huge, wasn't he? Big Sylvester Terkay.
Oh yeah, he was big brute of a boy.
Thinking about the main event, like we talked about, the fact they had to be an extreme chamber, as if the regular elimination chamber wasn't enough, because they'd only done a few before this, and that's the thing with ECW, they suddenly felt we need to put the word extreme in front of everything. Because like this era of ECW is what gave us the Extreme Rules match, and eventually led us to getting Extreme Rules as a pay-per-view. Because like every week it seemed like every time the title was online, like the Extreme Rules match, he had Show defending his title against likes of The Undertaker, Ric Flair, Batista, and the Hammerstein Ballroom, where their fans chanted "Change the channel."
Right, they would try and chuck their big names from the other shows at it, but it was just like, we don't want to see these guys on this show.
It's funny, Stephen. We're talking about how shit they done with ECW and stuff like that, and the crossover. And you mentioned Stevie Richards there against Rene Dupree. I've just realised, mate, that was a dark match. So it wasn't even a match. Like, you've got an ECW show, an ECW pay-per-view. You've booked somebody for ECW on it, but you don't put them on the main card. Mental. Stevie Richards
got quite over at one point in this form of ECW. I think he was feuding with Hardcore Holly around about this time, and he did get a relatively over because he was one of the guys in there who could technically still go to an extent, you know, because when Sabu and Sandman came over, they were done. They were absolutely gassed. So at this point, it was just like, They could have chucked him into the original stuff they did, like in the start of the next year, and it may have worked as opposed to who they put in it.
It's weird. You had Sandman on the card coming out to attack Mike Knox or the Kevin Thorne after their tag match, and like, why not just put Sandman in the chamber? Like, you can't do much, just bring him out his spot, have him do a few spots, then get eliminated. At least you've got someone from ECW in the chamber match. But one thing they did do quite well, I think, in some regards, is they used to use this as kind of a developmental brand like NXT would be, and they built new stars. Because like, you look at the people who got their start in the WWE, so we mentioned Punk and the things he's going to do. Miz and Morrison started their tag team on ECW. You had Kofi Kingston. Sheamus debuts in like June of 2009 on ECW.
Is that when Kofi was? Is that back when Kofi was Jamaican? Aye, before he was.
Yeah, he was Jamaican on there. He was Jamaican till I forgot he was Jamaican.
Well, Triple H called him it.
You had Sheamus debuting in June 2009, and by the end of the year he's the WWE champion. You also had guys kind of going there for a short while, kind of give their career a bit of a boost, like Zack Ryder's first singles push was in ECW. He developed these kind of Broski character. Sheila Benjamin developed the gold standard character on this brand. You had Mark Henry getting a bit of a run, finally getting a major title-ish. And who can forget how much ECW did for Viscera with the re-debut as Big Daddy V. That's two Viscera mentions in one show.
Oh, his get-up did him absolutely no favours.
Is that when he came out in his jammies?
No, that was it. That's when he was That's when he was the world's largest love machine. The Big Daddy V was when he had like just the straps and his.
Oh, it was his straps and the nipples, wasn't it?
Everything was flying out of him there. Oh my god, Scott! I'm surprised didn't mention Kane.
Oh, Kane won the title in like 8 seconds from Chavo Guerrero at WrestleMania.
Do you know it's really weird because I never properly watched ECW at that point. This was when like I could only get a wee bit of wrestling because I never had Sky properly, so I couldn't actually watch it that often. But it's one of those ones I feel like I kind of fell away from it for a wee bit. Even wrestling in general, I think at this point I kind of fell away from it. And then when I came back and I realised everybody who had been like ECW champion, I'm like, that's random. It was so random, like Kane, Vince, like all these guys having like title runs, you know what I mean? And then, to be fair, this was around at the same time where I then came back to wrestling and found out that Undertaker had got another world championship. At this point, I thought Undertaker was already on his way out in general. And then I came back to wrestling and found out he was a champ. I was like, okay.
The best one's still. You mentioned Swagger. The best one's the Christian thing's brilliant.
You can't
Christian return.
Christian.
Aye, this guy who's like one of the best tag wrestlers you ever had. He went away to TNA and became one of their best stars. He comes back on ECW. It's like let's bring this guy onto this brand to make it something big, and then it's just like they slap it in the face, you know. But that's some of the names you mentioned. I mean, one of the ones that didn't get enough was it William Regal's stable. They kind of got a decent run down there, and eventually they gave Ezekiel Jackson was the last champion. Zeke. He's like, when he looked like he was going to become a next big star, and then they gave him a chance, and it's like,
mate, I liked Ezekiel Jackson.
Oh, he was right. It was rubbish. He's just a good guy.
I know, but I liked him. I thought he was cool.
He was Ahmed Johnson. It's like Ahmed Johnson went in a time machine, and then just came back and tried wrestling. He had zero charisma. They had him with Barrett and the core, and Barrett was a mouthpiece, and it worked for him. But then they thought they'll chuck him in by himself, and it's just like zero charisma, barely can wrestle. It's just like, we've missed the boat here. It was the same in ECW. Regal was his mouthpiece, and he was just the heavy for Regal. I think Kozlov was in that stable as well.
Yeah, and then they kind of kicked Kozlov out. Yeah, they became a comedy character.
I was another one, man. Kozlov. That's somebody they could have. Remember, he came out and pure decimated Triple H in like 10 seconds. Like, properly could have done something with him, and then just totally ruined it. Like, he didn't even have any music, didn't he? No, he was one that had no entrance music. He just came out, smashed somebody, then left. And I'm like, you could have done so much better with that. And then he become a laughing stock. Eventually, I'm like, he's just ruined it.
I remember anything about Kozlov. I remember watching an episode of Punisher a couple months back, and there's a scene where he's fighting a bunch of Russians at a gym, and Kozlov just pops up in the background looking fucking jacked. And somebody It's weird when you look back in ECW, like the people who passed through there. There's a guy you wouldn't recognise from how he is now, because he had short hair then. He hadn't grown out his murder hawk yet. Vance Archer, as he was known then, one of my draft picks who didn't win the TNT title when he fucking should have. Not better at all.
They had, what was he? Chris Harris for TNA went there.
Oh,
And they did, what was his name again?
Freedom Walker.
Right, and they made this fight, like he'd obviously came over for TNA, he was a great tag wrestler, and I thought that we're up to something, and they showed up and he put on a bunch of weight and he's looked out of sorts, and they're just like, oh no, we should have signed James Storm.
Like, you mentioned ECW Jackson. I'll quickly mention the last ever episode of ECW because they announced the debut of NXT. What happened the week after ECW happened the same time, so it started the reality show and then onto the NXT we know now. The final episode of ECW featured that Extreme Rules match where Jackson beat Christian and won the ECW title, making the last ever champion. The only other two segments I have on the show is an episode of the Abraham Washington show, which is just a bunch of the ECW mid-carders as guests, and the show opened with Showmiz defending their unified tag team titles against Goldust and Yoshitatsu.
Oh, Goldust. Oh my god. Abraham Washington, that's a rough one. That's rough to look back on with him, you know. My god.
I remember actually
what an idiot.
I remember actually watching that final episode of ECW, and they did this big promo package that started like, after 20 years, ECW is finally over, and a lot of people say ECW was over a long time ago. It's finally being put to rest, but sadly, even though ECW was barely in the ground before it could even properly decompose, the corpse was dug up by TNA, who did Hardcore Justice in 2010, and then just brought back a bunch of ECW guys called EV2 and put them in a feud with Ric Flair's Fortune stable. The most striking thing when I was watching this at the time was seeing that Sabu was now bald.
Oh, it's like when you look at Shawn Michaels now, isn't it?
Don't even go on him. Don't get me started about Shawn Michaels, man.
It's just not the same.
You're still annoyed that Braun Strowman copied your look, Ryan.
I know. What's that all about?
They did literally just have the same. They had the same guys pretty much, didn't they? I think the only guy who had any sort of benefit from EV2 was Brian Kendrick.
I know, he was the most random addition. Like, he had no connection to ECW whatsoever, and then he randomly wore a white hood for some reason, thinking he was some sort of wizard.
They had was it the ultimate ECW and TNA guy in there, and Pat Keeney or Simon Diamond. He was in that stable, right? It's like you had all these guys. You had Van Dam, Dreamer, Foley, Raven, Rhino, Simon Diamond. Who cares?
They did Hardcore Justice, which would be so a shitter version of One Night Stand. Like, the whole show was under this weird blue lighting, and then you had the fact that they hired New Jack in 2010 was just a sign of the quality of that. And then at Bound for Glory, the biggest show of the year, these ECW guys beat Fortune with AJ Styles taking the pin.
What's quite funny, Stephen, you're saying about Simon Diamond there, and I had literally just looked up the same thing. I clicked on him, and it says that he was in ECW from 1998 until 2001. Talking about missing the fucking boat. How do you fall into that category when you were there at the end of the sinking ship? It'd been good and it was finished by that point.
There's some names on that card you mentioned, Scott. I mean, C.W. Anderson, WWE brought him in. He wrestled on NWA just at the end of last year, start of this year. So he had a crazy tenure. They had Brother Runt, obviously that was Spike Dudley. So they tried to bring all these guys, and they also brought Balls Mahoney in, and but they didn't have his name, so they had to call him Cajones. Who has the cojones to face me? I mean, when it comes to having to change somebody's name for legal reasons, it's better than some other examples we've seen over the years. I know, it's a bad one.
It's like when you're playing bloody Pro Evolution Soccer, isn't it, man? You get Ronaldo, but it's spelled R-I-N.
It's like when Billy Gunn first debuted for TNA in 05, they had to call him the Outlaw for a while before using his actual name because they couldn't call him Billy Gunn.
Stevie Richards was on this card too.
Good big Stevie Richards.
PJ Paluso, better known as Just Incredible.
Oh, I've got a good story about Just Incredible. I remember when I was younger, I was in A1 Comics, and I wanted to buy a wrestler, one of the wee figures. And remember in A1 Comics up the town, it was like the whole back wall was full of wrestlers. And I remember looking, and I was like, Just Incredible. I want to get that. Like, that's class. And my mum literally slagged me rotten in front of everybody in the shop for wanting to buy a guy called Just Incredible, to the point where I busted greeting and left to leave the shop because she embarrassed me in front of everybody. She's like, Just Incredible? You buying something called Just Incredible? For what a stupid name that is. I'm like,
don't mess with the X Factor.
Aye.
He's one of those names that took me longer than it should have to figure out what it was meant to be. like when you first realised what Paul Bearer actually means.
Is he not the guy that forced Raven to quit TNA back in like 2005, 2006? They had all these guys, I'm sure, that came in to face Raven. I think he was the guy that beat him. It was either him or X-Pac, one of the two. Can't remember, it was that long ago. Random fact. I'm going to look this up.
I do remember he was called Aldo Montoya for a while. He had that big yellow, what people refer to as a jockstrap on his face for a while in the New Gen era.
I do remember that, actually. No. He was one of the guys that they brought Larry Zbyszko brought in to try and beat Raven and make him exit, but Raven beat him, and it was X-Pac that beat him. Random fact of the show there.
I think we're talking about Just Incredible longer than is probably acceptable to be talking about, but
anybody has ever talked about Just Incredible on a podcast.
Yeah.
Apart from Vince Russo's, which he's on.
But as we're kind of wrapping up here, it's all about, you can also see the influence of ECW in places like ICW, which we've heard people call, like I said, ECW with an accent. Tommy Dreamer started House of Hardcore, which is kind of blending a lot of the best good elements of ECW. You got CZW obviously kind of taking that thing, kind of the death match kind of icons kind of in the kind of over in the US. But yeah, what would you guys kind of think is the legacy kind of ECW?
I think it actually started off this show by pretty much cementing the legacy. You know, talking about the legacy they've left in terms of, you know, ICW, CZW. That, you know, companies like this. This is a company in ECW that it was a flash in the pan almost. You know, it wasn't about for very long. It pushed the boundaries. It gave you something a bit different, but ultimately didn't work. But the company didn't work. The concept did, because that concept that they had, you see bits of it now, and still in WWE when they have their kind of what they call hardcore matches now, you know, your kind of no DQ matches and stuff. It's not the same idea, but they probably set the benchmark for that kind of stuff. ICW, like I kicked off by saying as well, you know, you said there, Scott, it's ECW with an accent, and that's exactly what it is. You know, it's modelled on ECW, and the fact that ICW have been so successful in recent years shows you there's an appetite there for ECW, and it also shows you that I think if ECW had received the backing for that TV deal that they got, and they got a bit of money behind them, you probably see them as a driving force these days. They'd probably they'd be up there with the biggest companies, because you look at AEW just now, you know, and it's not the same kind of idea, but it's a new wrestling company. It's doing something a bit different, and it's got money. It's been backed by money, and it just shows you if you can throw money at something, you get the product that you get for that. So, you know, Tony Khan's putting all his money into AEW. They're bringing in all these big stars, but it's working. You know, the fact that they've now done, but somebody said they've done more shows without a crowd than they've done with a crowd now at AEW, and they're still going, they're still sustainable, they're not on the way out, they're bringing new folk in. You know, if ECW back in the day had that, you know, kind of support behind them, you probably find that they would have just shot up. You know, probably not same level as what WWE's at, but it wouldn't be far off it.
I think what they often say in general, imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. So I think the legacy of ECW you kind of see when we see any form of wrestling in any promotion. Somebody does something crazy where they go through about 25 tables, they get whacked with chairs and everything like that. The crowd go ECW, ECW, ECW. So the fact that they were able to do something, as Ryan said, they might have not been as successful as they should have been. Let's be honest, they were only properly around for a good, 7 years maximum. But the fact that people still remember them, remember everything about it, anytime any of these guys show up in companies, it's an ECW chant to do,
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So the likes of these guys, the fact that they can go in anywhere and they get that type of reaction, it just shows that they did something. And the fact that, the fact that anybody would try and do it again, I think is the thing, because nobody's going out there and doing Shockmaster retakes. No one's doing that type of stuff, For all the bad stuff you get, for all the zombies out there, that type of stuff, people will still look back and think, Joey Styles going absolutely crazy at the top of his lungs. People remember it, People remember those moments where, Taz became champion, Rhino became champion of that company. That people remember the point where Jerry Lawler was ripping them on WWE and they would show up, The fact that they have some sort that people will look back in nostalgia to them, 20 odd years later. It's a sign that they did something. And they resonate with people, that area that they're in is still a hardcore, they know what they like and they've not diminished as a form of solid wrestling ground. So, And it's one of those areas that you look on. If you talk in America, the wrestling crowd, you've got New York City, the main bit, you got Chicago, and you've got them. They're the three ones that you would look at. They're the crazy crowds.
I think the best thing you can do with ECW is that if you are in wrestling or in any type of field, if you have an alternative to what the major leaders or what everybody else is presenting, then there probably will be an audience for it, because they, like I said, WWE and WCW were kind of family friendly, so they were the hardcore alternative, and it shows that they struggled when WWE started becoming more attitude based, and then they took some of those guys to help with that attitude, because you can see the influence in WWE in the later years in the attitude era. So like you said, when WWE and that weren't like them and born those influences, they were hotter because they had an alternative. And like Ryan said with AEW, it shows that pretty much in any field, especially wrestling, there's always room for an alternative, and people look at it in some ways as a failure because it went out of business. But in the years since, Bubba Ray and Paulina both said it probably wasn't meant to last as long. Probably it's a miracle that it lasted as long as it did, but it changed the game while it was around. It had an impact that's still being felt today. So that is the biggest kind of takeaway you can take from it. The fact that we're still talking about it, we're doing podcasts about it today, given that it's been dead since 2001, but people still have fond memories of ECW.
Yes, spot on there, Scott.
But that is all the time we have for today. I hope everybody has enjoyed our discussion about ECW, and if you have a different opinion on what you think the legacy of ECW is, let us know on social media. That'd be Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook at Suplex Retweet, or join our community page where you can discuss things like ECW and all sorts of wrestling related topics with other like-minded folk, and even some of us here on the podcast. And you can subscribe to Eat Sleep Suplex Retreat on Anchor, Spotify, and iTunes, and all good Android podcasting sites. You can tune in to next week's show where the Terry Funk of ESSR, David Graham, will be hosting a SummerSlam review show, because he just can't stay away, can he?
Can he go home? Can he go home?
It's like a bad rash. Just keeps coming back.
And he left in season 4. He could even wait till the end of season 5 before bloody coming back, could he?
He just loves the attention.
He's an egomaniac, mate. That's all he is. He's an egomaniac.
But speaking of the draft, Saturday Draft Live on Suplex Retreat Extra feed on all the same Android podcast sites you can find this feed on. So many other good shows I know I joked the other, but anyway, back to the wrestling.
Good show that. Good show that.
With, and all sorts of other stuff. But until then, anyway, thank you, my friend. Thank you, Ryan.
Welcome.
And Stephen.
Thanks, Scott. Pleasure.
And I've been Scott McLeod, and we'll see you next time.
Ladies and gentlemen, Eat, Sleep, Suplex, Retweet now proudly presents Suplex, Retweet Extra! Get bonus content on WWE, AEW, NXT, WCW, Scottish and World Independent Promotions. Subscribe now on Spotify, Apple and Android podcasting sites, as well as YouTube. Head over to suplexretweet.com now!